contact resolution. This is the first in the contact center optimization series of webinars brought to you by Amtel Communications in partnership with CCiNZ. My name is Ian McLean and I'm the NZ Sales Manager here at Amtel and your host for today. Before we start, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items first. All participants need to be in listen-only mode throughout the session. We do encourage and we would like you to ask as many questions as possible during the presentation. And you'll see that there is a question panel in the dashboard on the right side of your screen. If you have a question, please submit it there and we'll have the opportunity to get through those during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. After the presentation, you'll send a copy of the slides. These contain contact details for myself and Kay. Please feel free to contact us and we'll respond to you in due course. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Kay Jackson. Kay is a leading expert on first contact resolution from Response Learning Corporation and will be providing valuable input based on the many years of experience and research. Kay recently partnered with the APQC, that's the American Productivity and Quality Center, to study people, processes and technology at the forefront of the customer-centric revolution. Kay was a subject matter expert on best practices study hosted by APQC on first contact resolution, and she's going to be highlighting some of those findings in the session today. So please sit back and enjoy, and now over to Kay.
Great, thank you, Ian. Let me go over a little bit about what we're going to review today. The agenda, obviously, why are we measuring or paying attention to first contact resolution? How do we measure it, and then how do we improve it? One of the things I always want to make sure we do is that we walk away with something that's very actionable, and that at least when you walk away from this, there's a couple of things that you can probably put into place that will help you increase your first contact resolution. So let's get started on why first contact resolution. And just to frame this, there's really two primary reasons that first contact resolution is a high priority in the contact center these days. And we'll go through both of these. The first one is obviously customer satisfaction, and the other is the cost that you're paying in your contact center if you don't achieve a higher level of first contact resolution. And I'm sure all of you on this webinar have dealt with both of those. But what I'm going to do is really put together some things from the best practice study on first contact resolution, and I will go back and forth. I'll probably say FCR more than I say first contact resolution, but please know that anytime I say FCR, it's first contact resolution that I'm referring to. I really like, this was a data report done by Dimension Data in 2011. And the customer satisfaction side of it, I think it was critical when you look at the highest ranking issue that was going to help improve or deteriorate the customer satisfaction. And you can see with the red box that the agent's capability to resolve the query on the first call with no escalation when they did this survey was critical to either improve the customer satisfaction or deteriorate the customer satisfaction. And the question that they asked was over here: if you could fully or partially measure the impact of service changes on customer satisfaction, what are the service components that have the highest impact? So I think all of us know we have to get to the point where we are able to measure this, but we really need to be able to go to our management teams and say, it has been shown by a lot of different surveys, and the surveys are out there if you go look, if you do a search on the web about the relationship of customer satisfaction and first contact resolution. There are a lot of studies out there that show that there is a relationship. The thing we have to be careful about in these relationships is, is it really cause and effect, which I'm sure all of you know that sometimes there's not a clear line of cause and effect. But we have been able to quantify some of the customer loyalty and customer satisfaction with first contact resolution. Another study that I recently read said when it takes 2 or more calls to resolve an issue, customer satisfaction can drop as much as 15%. And again, that's basically people doing a self-report on their own statistics in contact centers. but I think that that's really relevant as we try to figure out what is the effect in my contact center. I'm not going to go through all of this, so don't worry. We're not going to go through all of this and figure out what the calculations are, but I think the most important thing to look at in this customer relations metrics chart, and if you've never been out on their website, which is the www.metrics.net, they have some great intelligence on measuring, surveying, customer satisfaction, resolving things, so that's a really good resource if you've never been out there. The reason I like this chart when we're dealing with first contact resolution and customer satisfaction is look what happens to the satisfaction and the delight whenever we say no to something. So are you calling to resolve a problem is pretty self-explanatory, but look what happens when we ask, is this the first call about the problem? And if you go to the no, you begin to see the percent delight with the company and satisfaction with the agent or the associate, delight with the associate. You see all of a sudden that when it's no, these numbers start going down significantly. And was the problem resolved on this call? And again, you see when it's a no, it's significantly different than if it was a yes. They did resolve the call on the first call. And so I think what this points to, again, is that we have to be very careful what we're solving and how we're solving it on the first contact. So again, remember this resource, and you will have this when we send the slides out after this presentation. But again, they're a great organization to get some additional information from. The other thing that really struck me the other day as a consumer, I was calling out to a company, and as all of us are consumers at some point, the agent at the end of the call asked me a real interesting question that I hadn't heard before. The agent said, if you were sent a survey after this call, would you say that this issue was resolved to your satisfaction? And we'll talk a little bit about in a couple of slides how people measure first contact resolution. But I thought this was a real interesting way for an agent to get involved. Now, I don't know how they were marking this or scoring this or tracking it, but I thought it was a real interesting way and a different way that I've never heard before or seen a contact center do. So we're getting very creative with this. So what are we looking at when we're trying to substantiate why we're measuring first contact resolution? When we did the best practice study, and this slide really points to it, the best practice companies did not measure the cost that it took to achieve first contact resolution. All of them measured the cost if they didn't receive it. And that's what this slide is about. It shows different ways to calculate the cost if we don't achieve first contact resolution. And there's 3 ways that basically people are doing it today. And you'll see the resources here. Contact centers are looking at the cost of labor calculation if we need more people because we're not resolving things on the first contact. We look at the cost per call calculation, and here you can see that this company with the size that they were looking at had a significant cost if they didn't achieve first contact resolution. And then again, customers are trying to validate and quantify customer satisfaction, the cost of customer loyalty or customer satisfaction. So again, understanding the cost of this to our organization if we don't achieve it. And remember that the most important thing from the best practice study is not to try and calculate the cost of achieving it, but the cost of not achieving it. So how are people measuring first contact resolution? And this is, I've got to tell you, this was one of the most fascinating parts of the best practice study, is what the best practice participants were, how they were measuring it, or even how some of the study participants that weren't necessarily best practice, how they were measuring it. And I think the most, you look at this one slide and it says, first what? You'll hear first call resolution, you'll hear first contact resolution, first level resolution, total contact ownership. One participant in the in the best practice study defined it as one contact. And how we measure it and what the measurement is really depends on the type of organization and transaction that we're trying to measure this for. So example, the first call resolution is really where the issue is resolved on the phone, so the first call, while the customer is still on the phone from that initial phone call. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Another company had first contact resolution, so this is really the multi-channel. So, if the contact is resolved when the individual who takes the initial report is the same person who resolves it, no matter what the multi-channel is for the contact. First level resolution, now this, obviously you know this from a help desk side or an IT side, which is really common. Do I have to escalate it? So we have to do a calculation that says when does it become too costly for the first level to resolve it, and we need to escalate it. But that's first level resolution, is that the customer's issue or problem is resolved with that first level. And then total contact ownership. I thought this was the most fascinating one, and it's built on the premise that the center is going to maintain ownership of the resolution of the contact regardless of what departmental boundaries it crosses to. So if I have to take it to a back office or if I have to take it to accounting, I still maintain control of this and make sure that it is resolved. And so, what do we take from this? Whatever you're measuring, again, the best practice study, which sometimes can be kind of frustrating, is there was no one right way. It's a matter of who you are, what your industry is, and what the service is. And so really understanding what you're trying to get to, and we'll go through some of the ways that you analyze this in just a minute as we go through the really what can I do to improve my first contact resolution. Another important qualification is who determines first contact resolution, and in the next slide we're going to show a comparison between a couple of years of how people are measuring it. In this one, look at the Bain & Company says 80% of their CEOs believe that their brand provides a superior customer experience, and 8% of their customers agree. I think we all know that there is usually some kind of differential between what we think we're doing and what the customer thinks we're doing, and trying to decrease that gap is always front of our minds. For the time being, let's put aside the fact that sometimes resolving an inquiry with a customer may not give the customer what they want. And we all have experiences of that a customer wants us to refund the money and send them something new and give them the next 10 years of something free, and we just simply can't do that. And so they may not like what our resolution is sometimes, but we can resolve what we feel is a comparable or a negotiable agreement with the customer. One of the things we have to do when we measure first contact resolution is we have to consider the ramification then of asking the customer, was the contact resolved on this first call? So we have to be careful that we should be measuring whether the contact or the call or the inquiry was resolved, and not whether the customer liked the resolution. And that's the nuance sometimes that we have to pay attention to when we ask customers about first contact resolution. Not that they liked it, but did we resolve it? And that's why sometimes the internal measurements are a little easier, and I'll show you some of those in a minute. If we do not resolve the contact on the first contact, we have to then make sure that the resolution is timely. understanding that if it crosses channels or crosses departments, we need to be able to track it because it really affects the customer satisfaction if it takes too long. Another important factor is it transparent? So what happens if we don't resolve something on the first contact and we tell the customer that we're going to escalate it or that we need to do some research, we need to make sure that we keep the customer in the loop, because all of the research shows that if the customer doesn't understand what we're doing while we're doing it, is their expectations, they will compress the expectations into the least amount of time, or the expectations, they will kind of mold it and they will come back to us and say, you didn't meet my expectations. So we have to constantly update them to let them know in a transparent way what we're doing to make sure that we resolve the issue. And then it needs to be accurate. And accurate is a couple of different things. So accuracy says that one of the most important things we found in the best practice study, and you know this, your consumers will sometimes shop your channels. So they may go out on your website and see what the answer is. They may go to one agent and not like what that agent does, and so they'll go to another agent. They'll go to a chat, so they'll shift from the phone to a chat. So we have to make sure that what we communicate with them is accurate across any contact that they have about the same issue. And then again, which I talked about a little bit before, is we need to make sure that we align our resolution with expectations. And the expectations are not what the customer has defined, but what we negotiate with the customer as a negotiable expectation to get it resolved. So how are people measuring it? This is a study from CCiNZ, and it compared 2009 to 2010, as you can see. And I think it's real interesting that how those of us in the contact center industry know that we are constantly on this pendulum swing about how we measure things. We're always trying to find the right way to measure and to get the most accurate data so that we can assess where we can invest and have a good ROI. So what you can see is in the 2009 figures, that the CRM tracking was huge, and then it fell and was usurped by quality monitoring and recent contact survey. And we can talk a little bit about how people are doing the contact survey. Like the one I told you before is the agent himself asked me at the end of the call. There are also, as you know, post-call automated surveys. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do a recent contact survey, which is, again, different from the CSAT, the Customer Satisfaction Survey, that's typically done by a corporation on an annual basis. And then the live customer survey, which says, you know, that could be by phone after the call. It could be a lot of different things. But I think it's interesting that that one has decreased in usage percentage-wise. So here's just a way for you to understand what some of the companies were doing in 2010 compared to 29. So again, what you see is there's no one right way, and we are still in flux trying to figure out how do we get the most accurate representation of our first contact resolution. You can also see all of the pros and cons of these. Whenever we do a measurement, we need to understand the reliability of it. For example, the agent who asked me, if you were sent a survey today, would you say that to your satisfaction this issue was resolved? So depending upon how that agent logged it and you know, his interpretation of my answer, and did he take any of the verbatims that I gave him after the call, the reliability could be low on that. And then the sample size. I mean, look at quality monitoring. I don't know how many of you monitor 100% of your calls, but most of the companies I work with, it's a small sample size that they're monitoring for first contact resolution. And then rate or error, again, some of these are, you look at quality monitoring, unless we have really trained our people to listen to the nuances of what it means to be resolved, it could have a lot of rate or error in there. And that's the other thing that the best practice people talk about a lot is the reliability, sample size, and rate of error. Let's really try and decrease the con side of all of that and increase the reliability of whatever we are measuring. So how do you measure ROI? This was another big topic of discussion during the best practice study, and no surprise, there's no one right answer. The answer was it really depends on how you're measuring it. So are you measuring the cost per call, the labor? The best practice that came out of understanding return on investment for the first contact resolution was however you build your ROI model, before you go through the tactics of how you're going to improve or how you're going to make sure that the ROI happens, is make sure you have a baseline measurement for the target area of improvement before you begin implementing the recommendations around your continual improvement. Many of the companies said that that was where they had fallen down, was that they had a great ROI model, they had some great tactics to improve first contact resolution, but they had failed to take a good baseline measurement, and they had failed to consider what some of the other items that could have affected the first contact resolution apart from the tactics that they were implementing. So they really cautioned everybody in the room as we were doing the readout to make sure that it's not only you have a great ROI model, but you have a good plan to understand how what you're doing is affecting that measurement and the return on investment when you move forward. I don't know how many of you have ever gone into the doctor's office or into the hospital and you've had some kind of pain issue. But I love using this one. They usually ask you for something like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does it hurt? And this is a scale of, this is just a medical model. It's a pain chart that talks about, you know, tell me based on this chart how much pain you're in. I like to use this when we're doing anything that is measuring the customer's experience, because we really need to understand how much pain we're causing the customer. When we measure first contact resolution, are we prioritizing the issues by level of pain? I think sometimes what happens is we've got this global view of first contact resolution, and we don't segment this by customer value, or we don't segment it by which are the most pain-causing reasons for the resolution. And so we really need to make sure that it's not a one-size first contact resolution metric for all. We really do need to segment it, because we can't do everything at once when we get to how do you really improve your first contact resolution. There are some pitfalls that we're cautioned by our best practice companies to avoid when we're measuring. The first one was, don't focus on first contact resolution alone. You have to have multiple perspectives. We have to have a balance of first contact resolution with quality, and we'll get to that. I think all of you know that if we don't balance something like first contact resolution with quality, then a lot of times our agents or we will tend to shift our focus, and the quality could decrease and the first contact resolution could, while the first contact resolution could increase. So we have to be careful that we have a balanced metric system. The other big don't that the best practice companies talked about was, don't only measure that whatever it was done, but versus how it was resolved and what was the experience. So again, the first contact resolution metric is a metric, and it says, here's the percentage of calls that we resolved on the first contact. But we've got to understand how it was resolved and what was the experience. So understanding the underlying issues of first contact is something we really need to focus on, not just the number. And this really leads to the next don't that they talked about, is don't make the measurement of first contact resolution self-serving. It's not just about hitting the numbers. I think one of the funniest examples, and this isn't about first contact resolution, but all of you probably have great stories about unbalanced metrics. And I was in a call center probably about a year ago, and it was a call center that had it had 2 incoming lines on every agent phone, which doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. But they were able to take 2 incoming calls from the phone system at one time. And I'm sitting by an agent and I'm watching what they're doing. I do a lot of observation side by side. So I'm sitting there watching the agent, and they're on a call on the first line, and a call comes in on the second line. So they put the first call on hold, they go to the second line, pick it up, don't say anything, and disconnect it. And they started doing that. I watched them do this a couple of times. So they're on a call, they go to the second line, and they connect it and disconnect it right away. So after a little while, when I could get a break with the agent, I said, help me understand what's going on. And the agent said, well, we got a memo the other day that we're really concerned about the hold times. And the management team wants to make sure that no caller is in that queue more than 90 seconds. And she said, we didn't get any instructions on how we were supposed to do that. And so we got together as a team, and the only way we could figure it out is that we needed to pick up that second line, but we couldn't decrease the quality on the first line, so we just disconnected. So we figured that they were going to call back. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah, we'd kind of call that the courtesy disconnect. So I went to the management team after talking about this and validating it with a couple of other agents, and I said, what are you measuring these days, and how are you doing? And they said, the interesting thing is we really have been focused on our service level. And I said, well, how are you doing on it? And they said, it's amazing. Once we put that memo out, we are just doing a phenomenal job. And so I asked them about the courtesy disconnect, and they knew nothing about it. And so again, it's not about hitting the numbers, and I know that probably sounds like an extreme example, but over and over again, I find how agents and management teams have unbalanced, or they need to just meet a metric, and it causes a bad effect on something else that is in the customer experience. So it's not self-serving in scope or definition or data collection or manipulation. It's about hitting the numbers. It's not about hitting the numbers. And then the last big measurement and don't from the best practice studies were, don't be more concerned with call resolution than issue resolution. And we'll get into some of what that means when we talk about how do you improve it. But issue resolution really takes it down to the process level and says, am I really resolving the true issue and not just a symptom of the issue, so that in this call I solved it, but I haven't solved it across any call that may come in with this issue. And that's where I find most often when I go into companies that they are approaching it on a symptomatic level, call by call, and haven't really gone under it and really changed the reason that they have a lower first contact resolution. So let's move on to how we can improve the first contact resolution. Interdepartmental linkages. All of us know that that we are dependent in the contact center on other departments. And this was a study that, even though it was done, you can see in 1997, is incredible research. And they basically did a statistical validation that if we have conflict and poor connectedness between departments, our product quality will decrease and our first contact resolution will decrease. So it is a phenomenal research study that says we have to make sure that we have good communication and connectedness with other departments. We do a survey we have a survey that's gone out to about 500 different companies, and one of the questions we asked was, how confident are you that customer handoffs are completed in such a way that your promises are kept? So what that means is the contact center has to give it off to another department to complete the promises that we have made, and we ask, how confident are you that that happens? When we ask that survey, it is always less than 50% of the time are they confident that the promises are kept, whether the promises are a timely resolution or what they promised the resolution would be. The lack of confidence is definite in that survey. So what did the best practice companies do? The most important thing they did was they didn't wait for other departments to come to them. They didn't wait for marketing to come with whatever was going out to the consumers. They didn't wait for the consumer to tell them, oh, by the way, I got this email, or I got this catalog, or I got this special promotion. They established liaisons, they built relationships, and they were incredibly proactive. They would start actually assigning people to different departments who would go out and develop these relationships and find out what was going on that was going to affect the contact center in the near or far future. So they would make sure that these linkages were strong, that there wasn't any conflict, and that there was good connectedness. And that's how they began to decrease the lack of first contact resolution. They were able to say, okay, we understand what the rest of the corporation is doing, and we can help achieve those goals and those strategies because we know what's going on in the organization. So again, the being proactive was one of the biggest things that these best practice studies said to help these interdepartmental linkages. Eliminate rules. This was another one. Most of the best practice studies actually have a consistent time that they go out to the agents or the staff and ask them to identify the rules that get in the way of FCR, first contact resolution. They all said the agents know what keep them from being able to resolve something. Now again, some of it is going to be something that you can't change. For example, it could be a compliance issue that takes time or takes escalation. So some of these things you can't get rid of, but some of the rules, one of the companies in the best practice study had identified 16 of these rules, and they really began to focus on these, and within a couple of months they had rewritten 15 of them and trained the agents concerning the new rules. And in essence, I think it was in about 3 months they had increased first contact resolution at least by 10%. And so it was significant in just paying attention to the rules. So being proactive on your interdepartmental relationships and eliminating the rules that are preventing your people that you can control, eliminating the rules that you can control in your contact center, and just ask your agents what's preventing you from achieving first contact resolution, and then really focus on those. And you'll find some are very, very quick wins, and those are the ones that you can target. And again, remember, when you do these things, are you segmenting it by the amount of pain? So sometimes quick wins are quick wins because everybody experiences it and it's minimal pain. Other times it's a few high-volume customers, high-value customers that are experiencing it with extreme pain. So always think through what exactly you're going to target when you look at these rules. Empower your people. This has been in the forefront of our thinking forever and ever and ever in the contact center, and it's not an easy proposition to do. For example, the one that we usually know or hear about is if you're in a sales environment in the contact center and someone calls in, or a customer has gotten some kind of invoice and there's an issue, a lot of companies say, okay, every agent can rebate or refund the customer this amount, and it's a dollar amount, or it's a replacement amount, or you can give this amount of a gift to them. And that's a real easy way that a lot of companies are doing it. The best practice companies go at it a little differently, and they really look at the appropriate level of authority to handle the types of calls that they receive. And they said it's a constant balancing act, and always needs to be reassessed. So they did not put this in place and say, okay, we're done and let's move forward. So what the best practice companies did is they looked at what are the top escalations, one of the first things, what are the top escalations and why do agents have to escalate them? Is it because they don't have the proper level of empowerment, or perhaps the agents feel like they are giving away the farm? And that was a real critical phrase that a lot of companies used. We have incredibly dedicated people working for us in the contact center, so we could empower them. And I've heard agents say it, and the best practice company said it, that they're empowered to do it, but boy, they're loyal to us, and they just don't want to do it because they're afraid they're going to give away too much of the company to the consumer. So we have to constantly assess that. And the best practice companies always make sure it's a thoughtful process and definition of what empowerment is. So what they do is they completely analyze the issue. They completely analyze the complexity of solving something versus taking action. They look at the customer's expectation and determine what's going to help the agent get to the next step. So it's an incredibly detailed process of empowerment. And after that, we all know that it's great to write a rule of what the empowerment is, but unless we train our people, and the interesting one is we need to give them the words. I think that's a real gap sometimes in our contact center, that we don't help people understand how to communicate something to a consumer. So when they're in the middle of a conversation, they flounder. They know what they can do, but they don't know how to communicate it. So empowering your people is not just the protocol of what they can do, it's how they can communicate and how they can achieve that empowerment to achieve better first contact resolution. And this is the biggie, setting customers' expectation. Again, setting customers' expectations is a detailed process according to our best practice companies. We have to write the protocols for the promises. So an example of this was an organization where they had identified repeat issues as being a problem. And so they started analyzing the calls, and they found that agents were saying, this was a fascinating one, they found out that agents were saying, we're going to call you back in 3 hours after we look into this. And as callers, they were very keen to get the issue resolved. Let's say that this organization was dealing with some computer problem, and we'll call you back in 3 hours. It'll be 3 hours, and we'll call back with a resolution. So the consumer is, okay, I got to get this fixed. I got to get this fixed. And we know that consumers are prone to overestimate time passing. So as this company started analyzing, they found that customers, no surprise, called back before the 3 hours were up. So what this company did is they changed the agent script, and they said, okay, it's now 11:45 a.m. We'll call you back by 2:45 a.m. So they set the customer expectations dramatically by putting the boundaries on it and giving the exact time. And once they did that, they found that the callbacks dropped immediately. But the interesting thing that happened at that point is a few weeks later, callbacks started going up again. So they started doing additional analysis. And what they found out was that a lot of agents had gone back to the old ways and had forgotten to give the exact time. So not only do we have to write the protocols for promises and setting expectations, we have to continually monitor them, because our veteran agents are good and can do things efficiently, but sometimes getting it ingrained to do it differently takes some time. Another company talked about perhaps the customer believes it's a promise that they're going to receive a credit, but it doesn't appear on the next bill. So this is a multi-channel issue where, in this case, the customer and even the agent believes that the original contact was fully resolved, but when the next invoice came out, the credit didn't appear. So how far are we tracking whether it was truly resolved, and did we meet the expectation that we set with the consumer? And again, another example is if the product doesn't arrive when expected, consumers may hear 4 to 6 weeks and expect it in exactly 4 weeks. The service isn't resolved when expected. If we're told it's going to be 5 p.m. and it's 5:01, they tend to call back. So we have to make sure how we are setting the expectations, and if we don't meet that in a very particular way, we have to understand what the customer is likely to do. The other thing that the best practice companies talked about is that customers also contribute to first contact resolution failures. They may not execute what they were supposed to do. We gave them instructions, they didn't follow instructions, or they gave us inaccurate information on the original call. And so when we figure out how to measure first contact resolution, we have to look at, okay, are there some calls that we just can't resolve on the first contact, and how do we figure out the percentage of those calls that are consumer failures or because we haven't set the expectation correctly. So it's a double-sided sword on this customer expectation, and are customers following, or are we just not defining their expectations correctly? And then set employee expectations for first contact resolution. What message are we sending to our employees? A real typical one that I hear in contact centers is we are very focused on first contact resolution, but when the calls go up in queue, do we tell the agents to hurry up through calls? And that's a double message. We either try to increase or decrease the talk time because we want to get people out of queue, or we allow them to spend the time necessary to resolve it on the first contact. And this is obviously just a comic that says, with so many callbacks, who has time to strive for first call resolution? So we have to make sure that we are giving the right message to our employees, and that our management team doesn't give them double messages when the circumstances or the situation in the contact center change. And this is a huge one that is really difficult sometimes to track. Resolve issues using the right channel. This is a way to improve first contact resolution. And what this whole illustration talks about is sometimes there are better channels to use to try to resolve issues. We used to ask in the contact center when all of these new types of channels were being developed, will the phone channel become obsolete? Well, we all know now that what happened to the phone channel is it basically started getting the more complex calls that, you know, I can send an email or I can chat, but sometimes it just gets too complex and I just need to talk on the phone. And so what this basically talks about is, do we know what channel, if it is a long resolution process, are we using the right channel? For example, we did a best practice study on email, and we looked at how many times it took an email turn, which means the consumer sends me an email and I answer back. And we looked at issue types, and how many turns it took to resolve issues. And again, between companies, it's all over the board, but typically the turns to resolve an issue on email, as you can well guess, it's very different and it takes longer in email than perhaps a chat or a phone call. So do you have in your organization, by issue type, if it's not resolved on the first contact or can't be resolved on the first contact, do you have in your call center a protocol that says, if it gets to this level or if it gets to this time frame that we haven't resolved it, we take it to a different channel? And that's really important. If you have chat, if you have email and multiple channels, figure out the best way, the best channel to resolve it in the most timely fashion. When we look at all of the different ways that a customer can approach us and look for a resolution, we used to talk about, does our customer relationship management application, can we track the customer through all of the channels? So that's been a big one since we've been developing channels in the contact center that the customer can use. The other thing that happens to the customer, let's look at service level. This can be used for service level. So we say, I have a 90% service level on my email, however we measure that, or on the phone. We can also use this in first contact resolution. We can say, boy, I've got a 90% first contact resolution in the telephone channel. But what if our customer starts using all of these channels to try and get something resolved, and each of these channels has a 90% that you're measuring as a target for first contact resolution? And let's say that poor customer is in this little 10% that doesn't get resolved. Well, once he starts going through some of these channels, all of a sudden he or she has an incredibly low concept or experience of first contact resolution. It just keeps decreasing the more channels he or she goes through. So we have to be aware of our measurement across channels again, and that's what the best practice organization said, is a lot of them had a target of 80 to 85% of all contacts are resolved on the first issue by the phone channel. But boy, when they started measuring the other ones, they found out that they were way behind in those measurements, and their targets caused the customer experience to be incredibly low. One of the best practice companies, this is what came out of their presentation to us. And this organization wants the Tier 0, which is their integrated self-service platform for their consumers. They want to have this as large as possible, most customers using it as possible, but they said they don't want customers using it because they're driving customers to use it. The leadership wants it so comprehensive and friendly that customers would prefer to use it. And I thought that was key, because a lot of times we hear, how do we make sure that it costs the customer more to use a different tier or a different level of service or a channel. In this model, the arrows between the tiers point in both directions, as you can see here. And the managers do not want transactions or a consumer to be trapped in any of these levels. They want them to be able to go back and forth seamlessly. And there should be, they want 3 different tiers, but a seamless experience for the customer as they try and complete a transaction on the first one, or if they have to be escalated between departments. This long axis down here has nothing to do, this long arrow has nothing to do with that there's less expertise over here than there is in Tier 0 than there is in Tier 2. All that means is that Tier 2, in their vernacular, is that Tier 2 and Tier 1 will always be necessary in their environment. And so they understand that they'll always need the self-service. They're going to always need these channels, and they're always going to need this channel. And that's really what we need to make sure, is that we have the right tiers defined. And according to this company, which I again stress that they really liked, is they were designing each tier to be friendly, that customers would go to the tier that is least costly for the organization but provided impeccable service and high first contact resolution. This is from that company, Senior Vice President for Service Delivery. And so if customers are speaking to us because they want to, that's one thing. However, if they are speaking to us because they cannot do business on the web or the IVR, we need to leverage our people, technology, and business intelligence to provide outstanding customer service through all channels. So when we do first contact resolution, this is what he was talking about, is they're not driving people because it's costing the company more. They're making it easy and flexible for the consumer to get their issues managed no matter what channel. These are all the ways when we did the best practice study. How do we develop expertise? Our agents who are dealing with the customer, whether it's in a face-to-face, phone call, chat, any of these, have to have expertise in providing first contact resolution. And these are all of the ways that the different customers or the companies were helping their agents develop the skills required for first contact resolution. So real quickly, basically, there's recorded examples of interactions using audio and videotapes, and you absolutely know this from quality monitoring. You probably have your coaches doing role plays with people, using videotape demonstrations that a lot of times I will video agents going through a process, a best practice process. Remember, these recorded on your quality monitoring are not necessarily best practice. When I videotape processes, I have we outline what a best practice is, and then we have a coach go through the process while I videotape it, demonstrate it, and we make that available. Most of you have instructor-led or classroom, one-on-one coaching. E-learning is big. We use a lot of computer-based technology these days to demonstrate or to communicate the knowledge side. Knowledge management is another huge one. Do we have all of the knowledge available to the agent on their desktop so that they don't have to escalate as often? Simulation is gaining now, and this is a great expert builder. And so when we build simulations of the process, we basically have the agent go through it in a simulated environment with a simulated customer, so they are not practicing on any customer before they're practicing gaining their expertise in a simulated environment. And then the Smart Agent desktop is basically built so that it drives the agent through the process to resolve a transaction. And what the Smart Agent desktop does is it basically allows the agent to listen more and not be so concerned with any of the applications behind the resolution that it's driving them through, so they can listen. And I talked already a little bit about knowledge required for first contact resolution. One of my current customers I was just in, we did an analysis of the knowledge that the agent had to access in order to complete transactions, and we found that there were 7 separate databases that all contained basically the same information. However, it was obviously a different database. Different people owned the database. There were different contributors, different users, different words were used for the same thing, and there was no automation of the knowledge to the agent desktop. And so basically they were using a PDF that was on their desktop, and they'd have to open it up and do a PDF search for something. So the best practice companies that we talked to said getting that automated and getting a single database of knowledge is critical to increase first contact resolution. And then obviously providing immediate access to experts. So if I have to get an answer, do my agents understand where the experts are, and can they get a hold of them, whether it's through chat or instant messaging or however? Can they get a hold of them while the consumer is on the phone, the customer's on the phone, to get an answer rather than having to disconnect from the customer and then access the expert? So the process is probably one of the most important things. Again, it's okay to measure. We can measure it. It's important to figure out the improvement of it, what the ROI is. But until we really fix the underlying processes, it's only a Band-Aid. It's only symptoms that we're dealing with. So being vigilant, making sure that we are looking for broken processes, Don't ignore the existence of the processes that may be broken. You have to seek them out. Identify and fix the hot spots. You look for warning signs that something is broken. Pay attention to diagnosing the cause, which I have talked about a lot already. You learn a lot by observing. As I said earlier, I sit side by side and just watch what's going on. I do a lot of process mapping. I used to hate process mapping, but I've gotten so that I really love it now. What is versus then getting the subject matter experts together to talk about how can we change this to improve the process and improve first contact resolution. I do record a lot of agents going through processes so that I can build those as-is maps. Again, fix the issue, not the symptom, and then test it. Again, we use the simulation product to make sure that whatever we're changing in the process is not going to cause something else to break down the line. There are so many call center dependencies that we have to make sure that when we test the solution we haven't broken something else, and then make sure that your processes are at the core of everything that you do. So ensure closure, and I know we're running out of time right now. I want to make sure that, again, ensure closure. Make sure everyone on your team has the same expectations. Track adherence to commitments. Assign, respond, and resolve issues. When you drive, notify the customer again about the resolution process. This is the transparency that I talked about before. And then be passionate about creating organizational awareness of customer issues, the pain levels, and first contact resolution. So I know we have a couple of minutes. I would love to take some questions if you have them. And I really appreciate this time. And please contact me. You can see my email address. This is a forum of contact center people where you can post questions and other people can answer you, but I am available to you any way I can be.
Okay, that's terrific. Look, just a couple of questions that have come through to me here that I wouldn't mind putting to you. And just one thing that's, I think, really important is how contact centers can measure first contact resolution when they have contacts that they know are really difficult to handle in that first call. Have you got any advice and thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Contact centers usually try to organize or categorize first contact resolution, and I talked about it briefly, but specifically, and I think this is important, there's 4 areas that they try to categorize when you know it's impossible to handle some things. The first one is obviously what's the category that we can achieve? What are the issues that we know we can have 100% first contact resolution? Then we have those that are achievable. And we look at the issues that should be 100% in our organization but aren't. So in the achievable category, what they do is they focus on training and coaching. The third category is potential, and these are the ones that require changes in procedures to achieve first contact resolution. And what they focus on at that point is they redesign or simplify the process. And then the fourth one is what I talked about earlier, which is you truly can't solve it in one contact. So these are the non-first contact resolution. And the focus on this one is it possible to change the barriers so that they do become possible first contact resolution issues?
Okay, thank you. Look, and one more as well that's coming through is, and this is important for all other organisations that use post-call surveying and the IVR tools that may be part of this solution as well. Is there any stats and measurement of success that relates to how IVRs are successful or otherwise in performing post-call surveys to measure first contact resolution?
Sure. The IVR post-call surveys are sample-based, so there's usually not any universal coverage. And the research, if you go out and you do research on the internet, it's strongly, there's strong evidence from the research that the silent majority don't do them. And so the true post-call structured telephone surveys have a little more significance in the results than do IVRs, the automated IVR surveys. The other thing that happens is agents don't always offer them. There's a couple of ways. One is the consumer is asked to take the survey at the beginning of the call. They find that a lot of consumers don't agree to it, or if they do agree, they hang up at the end. Or if you have your agent offer it, there are times when they don't always offer it, and so the agent sometimes plays a triage role in who they offer it to or not. So it's variable as far as the reliability in the IVR post-call surveying. You really have to understand who actually ended up taking it, and are you getting a negative halo effect because only the people who had a bad experience are actually taking that survey. The customers who believe that their problem was resolved and are satisfied according to the research, they participated at a far lower rate than those who feel it was not resolved. So it's a vested self-interest, and it can skew the results and reflect a lower first contact resolution than actually exists. And I think that one slide where I showed how we're trying to figure out which way we measure it is constantly changing, because the post-call IVR survey, if you look back a couple of years, was highly utilized, and it's not as utilized now, or if it is utilized, we analyze the data in a wholly different way.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So we're running out of time here, up to our 1 hour participation, which is bang on the money, which is very good. What I'd like to do, Kay, is thank you very much for helping us out this morning and taking the hit on this particular presentation. It was fascinating to get an international perspective on this topic, which is important to New Zealand businesses as well, absolutely. Now, all participants will receive an email link to this presentation, and on this last screen you'll see the contact details for myself and for Kay, so please drop us a line if you need to. So again, thank you very much, Kay. Fantastic. Just to finish off, look, for the CCiNZ members out there, please watch this space, because Amtel, in partnership with CCiNZ, will be putting together the next of these webinar series. This time we'll base it on social media integration in the contact centre. We're seeing a lot of uptake in that with the clients that we certainly deal with, and we know it's topical. So watch the space, and we'll catch up very shortly. Thanks again, Kay.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.